Good morning, it's 9 o'clock and you're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Today we'll be diving deep into the budget and the tension at the heart of the Treasury. We'll look at government by press release and also explore some good COVID news. I'll be back in just a few minutes, but first, here's the news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 9 o'clock. Millions of public sector workers are in line for a pay rise after the Chancellor confirmed he will scrap the year-long pay freeze. The change is part of tomorrow's budget and it will impact teachers, nurses, police and armed forces personnel. Last November, Rishi Sunak paused public sector pay increases with the exception of the NHS and those earning less than £24,000 a year after heavy borrowing during the pandemic. Mr Sunak said on Monday that the economy was firmly back on track and that it was right that frontline workers should see their wages rise. The Independent Office for Police Conduct say the number of police officers they've probed for allegations of sexual misconduct has spiked over the last 3 years. Last year, they investigated 70 police staff accused of abusing their position for sexual purposes. In 2016, they investigated 10. Between April of 2018 and March of this year, the IOPC proved the misconduct of 63 individuals, 38 of whom were either sacked or resigned.
I think misconduct can come in many forms and it reflects the culture sometimes, and it's really important that there is a culture in policing that has a zero tolerance of any form of behaviour that is misogynist, is sexist, is homophobic. There is just no place for that in modern policing. We want to see forces sending out that message. We want to see individual officers calling out their fellow officers, which we do see, but we'd like to see more of that. And we'd like to see forces really emphasising to officers that this behaviour is wrong and that there are consequences, as we're seeing today, when you're caught.
The Metropolitan Police has apologised to the family of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman for their initial response to reports that they were missing. The sisters were found dead in a North London park in June last year. Daniel Hussein will be sentenced for the double murder this week. Met Commissioner Cressida Dick said the way the force responded to the reports was below the standard we should have achieved and compounded the distress felt by their loved ones. A US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. Both the Duke of York and his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, must complete written statements on or before the 14th of July. Virginia Giuffre is seeking unspecified damages from the 61-year-old. Prince Andrew has repeatedly denied the allegations made against him, and his lawyer has dismissed the accusations as baseless. A new nationwide injunction has been granted against Insulate Britain protesters following a day of further demonstrations. The climate activist group had paused their campaign for 10 days but resumed road blocking yesterday. The Department for Transport said the High Court had granted interim injunctions against members of the climate change group who caused disruption on any part of the strategic road network in England. Sir David Attenborough has called on world leaders to act now or it will be too late for the planet. The 95-year-old issued the warning ahead of the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. Sir David said the possibilities of COP26 gave him some hope, but every month that passes, climate change becomes more and more incontrovertible. A Birmingham mother whose son was killed in a stabbing has told GB News bleed control kits are urgently needed across the country. Lynn Baird is campaigning to have the packs of heavy-duty bandages and tourniquets installed at key locations in towns and cities. So far, 2,000 kits have been distributed, and some have already been used to assist stab victims in Birmingham and London. Jack Lewis is from the Midlands Air Ambulance, told GB News that more than 60% of call-outs for the air ambulance are trauma-related.
Has a cardiac arrest in the street, a defibrillator gets there and can make the difference in 30 seconds. Yet if somebody has a catastrophic bleed, where do you get the equipment that's going to save that life? So things like the bleed control kits, like the citizen aid advice that's available, and like the first aid training that's out there, those things together will save lives, and the interventions available in this kit will absolutely stop a catastrophic hemorrhage in the right place in the right time.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with the headlines in half an hour. For now, let's go to the briefing with Tom.
Welcome to the briefing. This morning, one story is dominating politically, and we'll be exploring it in depth this morning. But stick around, it's not the only story in town. There's some really good COVID news we'll analyse later in the show as well. Well, the budget is tomorrow, although quite a lot of it has been pre-briefed. But will the Chancellor have much to say on economic growth? And what are the opportunities for Britain? Well, the Entrepreneurs Network is a think tank that believes they have an answer for the UK to become a tech superpower. So what is it? Well, let's talk now to Arya Babu, senior researcher at the Entrepreneurs Network. And you've got a paper out this morning about unlocking part of the economy for a huge, huge sector of workers, indeed 50% of people in this country. What's this all about?
So the UK suffers from having a severe lack of female founders. Comparable countries like Australia, Canada, the Netherlands have a much higher proportion of women starting businesses. In the UK, fewer than 1 in 3 founders is a woman.
And why is this a problem, particularly in the UK? Because those countries, comparable standards of living, comparable education, comparable social attitudes, why is the UK further behind in terms of women starting businesses?
They're similar in many ways, but one of the biggest differences in the UK is we have some of the most expensive childcare costs in the world, and we have the highest childcare subsidies as well. And this is largely because we over-regulate the sector and we have incredibly strict rules about how many staff members you can have per child in a nursery, which drives up the costs for women and means that many of them can't work after they've had children.
So there's this ratio of how many care staff have to be to each child, and that means that childcare in this country is a lot more expensive. What's that ratio, and how is it different to other countries?
So it varies from age to age. So when you have very, very young children, it's 1 or 2 children per staff member. It goes up and up until when you're about 4, it becomes, I think, about 14, and then children are immediately in school with 30. So it doesn't really make much sense. We could probably halve childcare costs if we had the same ratios as Norway, which are slightly looser.
Wow, and halving childcare costs, that could really be that key to unlocking a lot more economic growth. One of the big things about this budget, I think a lot of people are worried about, is that the Treasury doesn't seem to be having a growth strategy at its heart. It's talking a lot about what taxes it will rise, it's talking a lot about its commitments and sort of maybe some baubles to catch some headlines in terms of spending commitments. But really that strategy for growth is something that a lot of people are looking out for.
That's definitely true. The conversation about growth seems to have completely disappeared. All conversations about taxes are about who they fall upon, how much we're paying, who's paying, and we don't seem to be talking about what we really need to get out of the recovery, which is to grow our way out of it.
And potentially unlocking that sort of huge potential that we have in terms of women starting businesses is a route towards that growth.
This is definitely a route towards it, yes. The companies that hire the most people, that do the most innovation, are young companies. So we want as many founders as possible at the table, starting new businesses and innovating.
And what other policy suggestions would you like to see in this budget? What's the direction this Chancellor should be taking tomorrow?
In the budget specifically, I would really like to see full expensing made permanent. So currently we brought in the super deduction for the next couple of years.
Now this sounds very, very technical. Let's break this down a little bit. What is full expensing?
So full expensing is the idea that every time you invest in something that increases productivity, say you build a new factory or you buy new sewing machines or faster computers for your staff, you can write that off against your corporation tax bill, so you don't have to pay tax on it.
And at the moment, if you want to invest and potentially grow the potential of your company by buying those computers, that you're taxed on that, and therefore it's a disincentive to do so.
Currently, post-pandemic, we have a one-off 2-year hiatus on that tax, but we want to see that made permanent, like countries like Estonia.
I know that a number of MPs are pushing for this as well. I've been speaking to some of the 2019 intake who really do want to see this made permanent. Do you think this will happen in this budget, or is this potentially, if this is a 2-year deduction, this might well come in the next budget if it happens?
It'll be very telling about what it is that Rishi is trying to do in this budget, if he does this or if not. I know it's a very popular policy with the backbenchers, so I'm hoping that gives it some longevity, but we'll see.
And in terms of other policy, we've got the super deduction, we've got potentially what you want to see in terms of deregulating childcare, freeing up women in this country to start businesses and push forward economic growth. In terms of tax and spend, should we be worried about our budget deficit?
I don't think we should be that worried about it. We are in the bad times currently, so spending and pro-growth taxes should see us be more able to deal with our deficit and more able to deal with our debt. But we'll see what happens with that.
So you're saying that lower taxation might well spur economic growth and then make the economy bigger as a whole in order to pay down that debt. That used to be the Tory orthodoxy. That used to be what Conservatives said. They would boast about cutting corporation tax and actually bringing in more receipts because it spurred more business at the beginning of the 2010s. Why do you think it is that they no longer seem to be talking in that orthodoxy?
I think since about 2016, the growth conversation disappeared. It became about austerity. It became about getting the deficit down. It became all sorts of conversations like this. I think this is bad economic thinking. And every time we talk about taxing, spending, or economic policies, we should be thinking about growth. How can we maximise it? How can we get GDP up?
And in your role at the Entrepreneurs Network, you talk to ministers, you talk to people in Parliament all the time. Do you get a sense that there's an understanding that the growth conversation is missing a little bit here?
I get a sense that people are very worried that it's not happening at all, especially the entrepreneurs that we talk to. They're worried that the government is just going to hammer them over and over again with increases to corporation tax, increases to capital gains spending, and increases and cuts to EMA.
And there's a little bit of an opportunity here in terms of the way that the UK economy is potentially changing in the wake of leaving the European Union. There's some areas where we can deregulate. There's new trade deals going on, potentially joining the CPTPP, those big East Asian markets, that Indo-Pacific region that's sort of full of lots of growth and exciting opportunities. That's potentially a big expansion for us. What are the opportunities in not the immediate term, but the mid to long term that now Britain sees?
There are several sectors that we have the capacity to be world leaders in. AI, DeepMind was founded here. We are one of the best countries for that, one of the best countries for life sciences, and one of the best countries for green tech and innovation and those kinds. So we should be really focusing on these industries, and we are, to a certain degree. We're increasing the number of AI PhDs that we fund, and we're doing a lot in the life sciences sector, but obviously we could go further. We should put these at the heart of our industrial strategy and in the heart of our growth strategy.
Well, what a positive note to end on. Potentially, the United Kingdom having the potential to become that life sciences superpower, that tech superpower. Let's hope so. Arya Babu from the Entrepreneurs Network, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Well, we've heard a little bit about the policy that we might want to see the Treasury explore, but what makes the Treasury tick? What's the politics going on within the Treasury? What are the different incentives that this organisation faces? Well, to explore this question, Gerard Lyons is a leading economist and also a senior fellow at the think tank Policy Exchange and joins me now. Gerard, welcome to the programme. I was reading a piece of yours over the weekend in The Times that was really, really interesting to me. And it spoke about the duality of the Treasury. Number one, sort of an organisation that looks towards balancing budgets, a sort of fiscal department, but on the other hand, also an economics department, one that potentially should be looking towards wider economic strategy. And these two things seem to be in competition at the moment within the Treasury.
Well, Tom, first and foremost, very good morning. Great to be on the programme. Yeah, in terms of that article in The Times, I was looking forward to the budget, looking at the economic backdrop and the policy implications of what's happening. And then I talked, therefore, about the Treasury. And you're correct. This has been an ongoing issue. It's obviously relevant in terms of economic policy making, important in terms of this week, and also very relevant in terms of the longer-term outlook. It's been an issue since the 1960s. Harold Wilson, when he was Prime Minister, famously said back in 1964 or so that you can be in office but not in power. He felt that the power lay with the Treasury. He felt that the Treasury even then was very focused on the budgetary side of its importance, namely trying to balance the budget. And the Prime Minister then set up the Department of Economic Affairs. The reason being, coming back to your question, is that in this country, as opposed to many other countries, we have the main Whitehall Department, the Treasury, focusing on two issues: balancing the budget and overall economic policy. In many other countries, balancing the budget, the finance aspect, is very separate to the whole economic side. And I think it's very relevant in terms of the debate you've just had with the lady before me, talking about the whole innovation side, the tech side of the economy. What we have at the moment, particularly for necessary reason, is a high budget deficit. As we come out of this pandemic, the budget deficit will fall. We therefore need to take advantage of this to try and supercharge the economy. The trend rate of growth in the UK before the financial crisis was almost twice the rate of growth it's seen as now. before the financial crisis, the UK economy was then growing on trend about 2.25%. That meant it doubled in size in 32 years. Long time, but 32 years is pretty impressive. Now the trend rate of growth is about 1.2%. That means we double in size every 60 years. So this really does matter in terms of living standards, wages, and all issues like that. But the point I make, and the one you've asked about, is I think the Treasury over-focuses on the whole budgetary side of the equation, and we need to have a greater scrutiny about what they do on the economic growth side. We need to focus more on the growth side, and if necessary, think about taking some of the powers away from the Treasury, even splitting it up to address that problem.
And yet, when Harold Wilson tried to split up the Treasury, creating that Department of Economic Affairs, as you mentioned, that didn't last for terribly long. The Treasury simply reabsorbed those functions a little bit later down the line. Is there a worry that potentially this is an inexorable problem? However you try and divide it, the sort of tentacles of the Treasury will spread out further and grab it all back again.
Yeah. Well, the Treasury is now a super ministry and therefore dominates all aspects across Whitehall because it's in charge of the money. But the additional challenge we have in the UK is that everything is vertical, shall we say. All ministries, whichever ministry it is, point up to their minister. Many of the issues we need to face are cross-government. For instance, when Gordon Brown, to give you an example, was a Prime Minister, he was about to make a visit to China. As a China expert, I was brought in to speak to all these people gathered across Whitehall. We met in the map room at the Foreign Office. It was packed solid. There were 3 outside speakers. I was one, another one from the FT, another one from Warwick University. And I said, why is the room so busy? And the person in charge said, well, we invited across Whitehall all the people working on China, and we didn't realise there were so many. This is the first time we've all met. That's why the room is so small, more people than we expected. Basically, there are many people working on different aspects of a different policy area maybe, but they're all split across different departments. But this Chancellor in his last budget did say that he was moving a significant part of the Treasury to Darlington. That makes sense. It fits with the levelling up agenda. So this Chancellor, I think, has shown a great basically track record during the pandemic, but is clearly, given what he's already announced regarding the Treasury, is clearly open to ideas. So I think it's quite possible that we could start to see, as we emerge from this pandemic, and start to address a wider array of areas, levelling up included green agenda, start to see this argument in favour of an economic department maybe gather momentum.
Interesting that you mentioned the move to the Treasury, this substantial chunk of the Treasury moving to Darlington, as if it's significant. There's been a lot of criticism about this, that this is sort of optics. This is a bit of a Blairite strategy just to sort of where many parts of the civil service was spun out to the regions, and it didn't really change all that much about thinking. The head office remained in London, the important posts remained in London, and yes, you sort of had a bit of a PR flair further out in the country. To what extent do you think that that's a valid criticism?
Well, I think it is a valid, let's say it's a valid point. Whether it's a valid criticism remains to be seen. Clearly, we've moved other departments or part of them out of London. Sometimes it's therefore been difficult, as I understand it, to attract skilled staff in all those various areas. But maybe we shouldn't compare everything like with like, so to speak. Some departments might work differently now than other departments being moved in the past. But clearly is that it's a bit like Brexit in some respects in a different way. It's not just leaving the EU, it's what you do when you leave. In terms of moving departments, not just moving the department, is what you do when you move them. Clearly, with the Chancellor, or this current Chancellor, having a constituency in Richmond in North Yorkshire, therefore, as I understand it, he regularly visits the Darlington operation. So having buy-in from the top, tying it in with policy areas is clearly important. So can it be made to succeed? I would say yes. But are the criticisms valid? Yes, they are also valid at the moment.
And just finally, in a very, very short sentence, do you think that this Chancellor will be able to deliver a strategy for growth tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow's budget is about stabilising the public finances. That will be a good stepping stone, but we need to do more on the growth side. So the answer to yours is partially yes.
Well, Gerard Lyons, let's look forward to that budget tomorrow. I know we'll have a lot of analysis here on GBNews. Thank you for your analysis here today ahead of that. We will be following everything that happens with great, great interest. And I do think that was a really fascinating piece about that duality of the Treasury. Well, sticking with the budget a little bit now. A hike in the minimum wage, cheaper Prosecco, higher air passenger duty. £500 million for family hubs, £850 million for museums, £5 million for veterans, £6 billion to tackle England's NHS waiting lists, and a £7 billion regional transport overhaul. It feels like there's very little of the upcoming budget left to announce. Over a dozen press releases have been sent out from the Treasury in the last week or so, pre-announcing the eye-catching measures of the budget. Almost £26 billion in extra spending has been announced ahead of the official statement in the House of Commons, a fact that's not escaped the Speaker of the House of Commons. Yesterday, Lindsay Hoyle berated the government of its atypical press release strategy, accusing the Chancellor of riding roughshod over MPs. Ministers must make important announcements first to this chamber, he declared, referencing the long-standing rules of Parliament, where MPs must hear government announcements first. He went on to say it's evident that the government Treasury briefed journalists on the content of the forthcoming budget over the weekend, including on NHS funding. And here's where it gets interesting. A clearly frustrated Speaker went on to say, at one time ministers did the right thing if they briefed before a budget. They walked. Yes, absolutely. They resigned. The words of the Speaker of the House of Commons. And he's right. Hugh Dalton was Clement Attlee's first Chancellor of the Exchequer. That was until 1947 when he resigned. Why? Because he seemingly inadvertently revealed a sentence of his budget to a reporter minutes before delivering that budget speech. Yes, in 1947, that was a resigning offence. Now it appears to be mandatory. Well, feel free to call me old-fashioned, but the traditions of the House of Commons should mean something. Parliament, not government, is sovereign. Antiquated rules that have stood the test of centuries are there for a reason, and the erosion of those conventions should not be taken lightly. Turning to COVID now, and don't switch off, this is a good news segment. After a week of worry and calls for restrictions, cases have turned a corner. What's being described as an inexorable rise has become yet another bump. Let's look at the government's COVID data. Here it is, here's the case graph, and you can see while they were rising, cases have begun to tick down. And what's more, Professor Oliver Johnson at Bristol University has produced a really useful case ratio graph. Let's take a look at that. We can see now that at this rate, cases will halve every 4 weeks. It's a really encouraging picture. But perhaps most importantly of all, hospital admissions, not cases, admissions are falling now too. Here's another graph from Oliver Johnson. We can see it's just about turned a corner. Admissions starting to level off and no doubt come down. Well, to help make sense of all of this now, I'm delighted to be joined by Christopher Snowdon, the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs and one of the most level-headed and incisive commentators on COVID. Welcome to the programme, Christopher. Did you expect this to happen?
At some point, yeah, absolutely. People who've been following the data have seen that the growth in cases has been declining for a week or so. So I think it was only a matter of time, and people have been rather hysterical last week and jumping the gun very much, I think, some of the trade unions, the trade associations, the Labour Party in the end, calling for Plan B. Without really giving cases a chance to level off and decline on their own, which they've done 3 or 4 times since Freedom Day. It's not totally unexpected. There's no reason to expect inexorable rising cases. People have just got this 2020 mentality. They can't shake off the way things were last year, when basically the only way you could bring cases down was through lockdowns. We're in 2021. Things are so different. We're building up immunity all the time. The booster shot rollout is now actually going at a fair old tick. We're getting about 500,000 people infected every week, which is bad in one sense, obviously, but it's good in the sense that they're building up natural immunity. The unvaccinated are being mopped up. Whether this continues for a long time, I don't know. I think we can probably expect rates to go up and down for the next few months, I would think. But I don't think we should be assuming that we're going to get to 100,000 infections anytime soon. I certainly don't think we should be assuming hospital capacity is going to be beyond what the NHS can cope with.
So in your view, restrictions not necessary, Freedom Day a success, and we're immune enough as a population to see us through the winter?
Yeah, we haven't reached herd immunity, but more and more people are getting natural immunity, and indeed from the third booster shot, some really important extra immunity. And you can already see the effect of that with the hospitalizations and deaths of the older cohort. So look, I mean, R has been around about 1 since Freedom Day. Sometimes it's been a bit over, sometimes it's been a bit below. But casting my mind back to this time last year, we almost exactly a year ago, we exceeded 1,000 hospitalizations a day in England. And we stayed above 1,000 hospitalizations for the next 4 months. Didn't go below that until 20th of February. And in the meantime, we had rates of up to more than 4,000 hospitalizations a day. That's the kind of caseload and hospitalization data that really puts serious pressure on the NHS. Not what we've seen so far. Nowhere near what we've seen so far.
One of the interesting points around this conversation that I've noticed in the press in the last few days is that people have stopped talking about a massive case rise, stopped talking so much about the potential of 100,000 cases a day, which now seems unlikely. But the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, was saying earlier this week, indeed yesterday, I think, that cases bumbling around between 30 and 50,000 is unacceptable, that this is a worry, that this is causing harm to people and indeed putting pressure on the NHS. Some people are saying that the case levels, even if they stay around where they are now, that is a bit too much.
That is probably true, but I don't know why you'd assume that's going to happen. I mean, the hospitalizations are the key thing, really, when you're looking, obviously, at overwhelming the NHS. When you get below about 600 hospitalizations a day in England, you start to see the hospitals begin to empty out. Above that, you see this gradual increase in the number of people in bed in hospital with COVID. And of course, if that continues for months and months and months, it becomes a really serious situation. We've got about 6,000 people in hospital at the moment. At the peak of the winter wave, we had about 40,000, I think. I'm not saying we want to be aiming to get up to that kind of level again, but the point is that we won't. I think we will go up and down. There'll be times when the number of people in hospital with COVID declines, hopefully for a sustained period, and there'll be times when it goes up. People shouldn't be panicking about this. We did kind of expect it. Nobody said that we were going to, vaccinate as many people as possible and then reach herd immunity and this thing was going to disappear. It's not going to disappear. It's endemic. Most people are going to get COVID in their lifetime, probably more than once. There's not much more we can do about this. We can't be panicking, wearing face masks and bringing in vaccine passports and this stuff, which the government seems to more or less admit isn't really going to work anyway. So I think the zero COVID people, the people who have been hysterical about this, I think they've really shown their hand a bit too early by calling for heavy restrictions in the middle of October when case numbers are, they're high, but hospitalizations aren't and deaths are not particularly high either. We need to live with this. People keep saying that, but not everybody seems to act on it.
It's interesting. We're hearing a lot of worry every time that the cases go up and then almost surprise whenever the cases go down. And I suppose this is just natural. It's going to be bumping up and down for the foreseeable future. At what point do we sort of need to stop following the cases quite so obsessively? At what point should we stop sort of reporting whether cases are rising and falling, as no doubt they will?
I think there comes a point where we need to stop reporting these figures at all, really. I don't think there's any justification for the news to be flashing up the number of people dying from COVID every single day. We don't do that for any other disease. Looking at the case numbers is important because it gives you an idea of where we're going in the future. So people like me certainly will be going online at 4 p.m. every day and seeing what's going on. I imagine that will be happening all through winter. I look forward to the day when I don't feel the urge to do that anymore. But what would be nice is if the media actually reported when case numbers are going down, which they haven't done. And I know it's only 2 days of data, but it was a 14% drop yesterday. That's pretty significant. This is not, I don't think, some little blip, some little fluke. But I haven't seen much interest in it from the media. And we're talking now about a very high likelihood that the infection level peaked, not last weekend, but the weekend before last. So this whole period last week where people were going crazy for new restrictions, turns out actually infections were almost certainly dropping at that time.
It is fascinating. The media loves to report it when cases are going up, less likely to report it when cases are going down. Hopefully, this conversation may well have provided a little bit of a corrective to that. Christopher Snowdon of the Institute of Economic Affairs, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing this morning. These conversations are always really incisive. Well, coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys and Mercy Muroki. That's it from me for now. Catch me again tomorrow at 9 a.m. But first, here's the weather.
Hello, good morning. Contrasts across the UK this morning. A bright start in the east, albeit on the chilly side. A cloudier start elsewhere, and rain will steadily move across northern parts of the country as this weather front moves in. This is a warm front, and it's going to open a door to this slice of mild, moist and very windy Atlantic air, and that's really going to dominate proceedings through the next few days in many places. So the rainfall marching across the country, a spell of rain for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, northwest Wales for a time. 1 or 2 spots of rain further south as the cloud thickens on its way across the UK. But on the whole, by the afternoon, actually many places are turning drier and brighter. There'll be some holes appearing in the cloud and the wind will pick up, but it's coming from a mild direction. So 16 or 17 in the south, 14 to 16 further north. And that wind particularly gusty around hills or just to the east of the hills across northern England, southern Scotland, and gales developing across northern and western coasts of Scotland. The wet weather, though, in the northwest pushes its way south into the rest of Scotland overnight, and then by dawn on Wednesday, it's into Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, northwest England. Otherwise, it's a very mild start tomorrow morning for much of England and Wales, 15s as we begin things. A lot of cloud around, that strong breeze continues. But really the focus for the wet weather is in this small area of northwest Wales, northwest England, southwest Scotland. Risk of localised flooding in some places, particularly Cumbria. Yellow rain warnings in force. Brighter to the north, but a little cooler. A few showers in the northwest of Scotland. And also brighter to the south. 18 Celsius possible across parts of southeast England and East Anglia. But the rain does move south through Thursday and Friday. Some wet weather, particularly for southwest England and South Wales. And it stays mild across the board.